such a thing. Ooh, but they did. They did to such an extent that 2/3 of these Yale students recruited would increase the shock because the student was actually an actor. There was no actual electric shock, but the perpetrators didn't know that. The students would increase the shock to a point where the actor went unconscious. Because if there was actually a live current, the way the student was turning up the dial, it would have put someone unconscious. But they just kept turning it up, turning it up, turning it up. And the actor behind the screen is moaning and groaning, oh, 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 oh. And finally the actor collapses on the floor unconscious while the student is still, you got the answer wrong. There's a very famous experiment. 2/3 of the students recruited were turning up the voltage to a point where the person behind the screen would go unconscious. Some scientists were questioning, well, this experiment took place at Yale, and therefore the students recruited to give the shocks, they just consider that everything that happens at Yale is impeccable. So they took the experiment and for the second time, a half hour down the road to Bridgeport, Connecticut, which is a rough place. And there they got the same results. The students fully bought in to the fact that there's an expert who's running this whole program. And that expert takes full responsibility. And I accept that the mission is to get these students behind the screen to get the right answers. I'm playing my part. I'm doing good. This is amazing. The power of situation. Now, from the yoga point of view, this is not at all surprising. Krishna points out in Bhagavad Gita that once you identify with your body and mind as the self, because the body and mind is matter, you're subject to all kinds of permutations of material nature. Because from the yoga psychology point of view, material nature is full of various influences, or roughly speaking, winds that are blowing. And so, giving up your spiritual identity, you leave yourself wide open to be swept this way and that way, because you're not actually behaving according to your real identity as spirit soul, as a non-material entity, part of the supreme non-material entity. So this gets very fascinating in terms of how we see ourselves and our mission. Could it be that we've bought in wholesale to something that is far beyond what we can realize? A mass consensual trance in which we are sure I am matter and the purpose of my life is to materially fulfill my material self, because that's what I am. To think otherwise requires great effort, because there is so much tradition, family influence, social influence that is pushing us to not resist the status quo. The status quo we're talking about here is not simply political or economic. It's something much bigger than that. It's a matrix of illusion that's beyond politics, economics, or what is normally known as culture. I find that Bhagavad Gita introduces us to energies that operate on a scale far beyond what normally we would expect. It seems to be an innocent thing. I think I'm the body and mind, so what? But Krishna points out in Bhagavad Gita that this is a tragic mistake which leaves ourselves wide open for all kinds of bizarre influences. Because the first bizarre influence is to think I am matter. Once that decision is made, the door is wide open for practically anything. So the therapy that's recommended in the Bhakti Yoga text is reviving our awareness of our non-material identity in connection with the supreme spiritual identity. We need to understand the part as well as the whole, because obviously the part can exist separate from the whole. So this is the thrust of Bhagavad Gita's program for how to correct the illusion. And it's not just negative. It's not just, for example, how to escape illusion. You may have heard the term nirvana. In the Sanskrit meaning of the term nirvana, vana means forest and nir means out of. You're out of the forest of illusion when you attain nirvana. But then the next question would be, once I'm out of the forest of illusion, where am I? Because if I don't have a better deal, once I leave the forest of illusion, I'll probably run right back to the forest. So this is the special significance of the Bhakti spiritual text. They explain what our positive identity is and what we do in our positive identity as spiritual entities in relation to the supreme spiritual entity. Krishna imparts this most valuable technology. In this way, because you're dealing with what's real, you're immune to what is illusion. One last point. In the second chapter of Bhagavad Gita, Krishna makes a very interesting point about motivational psychology. He explains that you may understand that there's an illusion, and you may try to restrain yourself from interacting with it, but you'll fail. The only way you can succeed is by a positive solution, by getting a taste of the superior spiritual reality. Then you can successfully let go of the inferior. You'll let go of the illusion. Just think about that. I've met students all over the world. I've met persons of all types all over the world, and some of them are shrewd enough to see the veil. Like, why is everyone acting in a certain way? Why is everyone accepting certain kinds of goals? Why do they accept the body and mind as the self? Why do they see their purpose and mission in life in a certain way? Let's get underneath the hood of the car and see what's going on. Why? You can do that. You can be very shrewd and do that. But this matrix of illusion is so powerful that unless you have something positive to latch onto, you'll inevitably fall back into the flow of illusion. But if you have a superior experience, you'll easily let go of the inferior experience. This is self-interest in the best way. You'll easily let go of inferior pleasure when you taste superior pleasure. So this is the payoff that Krishna offers in Bhagavad Gita. Replace the inferior temporary material pleasure with the superior pleasure that's generated in the relationship between the non-material self and the non-material supreme self. How to get that laboratory experience. That is considered the ultimate goal of life. What are the social and economic ramifications? If persons cannot be manipulated anymore through their crass material desires, then they'll be peaceful. But as long as you think you're the body and mind, you leave yourself wide open for manipulation in a consumer society. You become inflamed with desires that are never fulfilled sufficiently. And you can't be satisfied in that way because you're not material. So how can material achievements and material acquisitions satisfy you if you're not material? If people can be given an actual laboratory experience of their non-material identity and an ultimate connection, they won't be subject to so much strife and dissatisfaction that comes when we pursue material goals. As long as people don't have a superior taste, they must pursue the inferior taste, and it's cruel to expect otherwise. I don't know if any of you remember, maybe in the 90s, one of the presidents, his wife, started a campaign to stop drug use amongst young people. And it was also present on university campuses, probably well before your time. And so the campaign was called Just Say No. Obviously the campaign didn't succeed very well because just say no. In fact, some young people started a parody of it on some college campuses, and they started a movement called Just Say Yes. In other words, how ridiculous is this? Just say no. What are you giving us better? You know, we want pleasure, we want enjoyment. If we're intelligent enough to manage the drug use so that it brings pleasure without any lasting damage, so be it. How can you tell us just say no? Look, in Bhagavad Gita you'll find that Krishna doesn't have that policy of just say no. What Krishna presents in Bhagavad Gita is say yes to the superior pleasure, and automatically you drop the inferior pleasure. So this is Bhakti Yoga psychology. This is Krishna conscious psychology at its best. And this way, there's relief from this mass consensual trance. So if there's one thing that we can take away from my presentation, I hope it's that when you're walking around, you start considering, why do I see everyone as matter? Why do I consider myself as matter and that my goals are material, that I seek material fulfillment and satisfaction? Why? Do I understand the secrets of the self? Why am I so sure? Or, if I'm not sure, why do I avoid the issue of whether my identity is material or non-material? These questions mark the beginning of someone who has the possibility of escaping the mass consensual trance. And the viewpoint of Bhagavad Gita is that that escape is the greatest priority in human life. All right, I'll stop here and perhaps there are some questions. Yes.
So what is superior taste? Is it love?
Okay. Now, as soon as we start discussing things like love, we need, again, to deal with the identity question. Because who exactly is loving and who is being loved? What are you actually dealing with? Are you dealing with the body? Are you dealing with the mind? Or are you dealing with something else? So according to what we think we are, we'll have a certain standard or a certain version of what love is. according to the viewpoint of Krishna Yoga, or Bhakti Yoga, real love is when you aid someone in their enlightenment. And negativity, even in the name of love, is when you treat someone as if they're the body and mind. It may be known as love, but actually you're doing the person a great disfavor. You're deepening their illusion. You're perpetuating their illusion. Even though the intentions are good. There's no doubt about that. Just think, if you were lost and someone helped you find your way, you would be very grateful to that person. So if we consider that we're lost in the mass consensual trance and the matrix of illusion, and someone helps us to wake up from the daydream and night dream, we'd be very grateful. At the same time, I have to point out, let's say I'm sick and I go to a doctor, which I do sometimes, and the doctor heals my body. Do I just, as I'm leaving his office, say, anyway, I'm not the body, so... No, I'm grateful, but I don't think he solved my problems of life. There's a big difference. It's like you drive a car, and there's something wrong with your car, you've got brake trouble or something like that. Indeed, you take it to a mechanic, and you're very happy if the mechanic doesn't cheat you. And so you drive away, the brakes work, but you don't think your main problems in life have been solved. So that's the difference. So it's not that we are recommending ignore people's bodily and mental welfare. What we are recommending, though, is understand what the real identity is, and then you'll understand what real love is. Okay? Thank you. Very nice question. Yes?
Are there characteristics of people, or qualities in people, in your experience or your knowledge, that would tend, that they would want to consider these things like that you've been discussing, and perhaps even go deeper into it as they become aware of it?
Yes. You can approach this subject matter by intelligence. There are persons shrewd enough who want to get to the bottom of what I was discussing. You can approach this subject by exhaustion, material exhaustion. I've tried everything and nothing is working. There has to be something else. Or it can be a combination of the two, intelligence and exhaustion. Otherwise, you can just be plain lucky. Yes.
Another question, and you touched on this, but I'm not sure what it is.
Mm-hmm.
The sort of the idea that you're trading one illusion for another one, and you barely touched on it.
The night dream and daydream?
Pardon?
You mean the night dream and daydream?
No. That okay, we're in a sense striving for something.
Yes.
Striving to unbox ourselves.
Yes.
And where are we when that happens? Are we into it just another box that we think is a better box, but is it the ultimate box?
Right.
And and why is it better?
Okay, let's look at things from the viewpoint of pleasure. I don't think anyone here is against pleasure. But why not look at your question from the viewpoint of understanding what is real pleasure, what's lasting, what is substantial, what is temporary and flickering. Just by pursuing that, the roadway of pleasure, you can understand a lot about yourself, both in terms of the false self, the real self, and the supreme self. The yoga texts explain that the supreme source is actually full of unlimited pleasure. That's actually what Krishna means, the all-attractive. source of pleasure. Is there a process by which we connect with that ultimate source of pleasure? And the pleasure that we get cannot be compared to the flickering pleasure of matter. So this is what Krishna offers in Bhagavad Gita. And just like in any experiment, you are given techniques for verifying what you're hearing. You apply your senses and you get a certain result, and that naturally begins to give you confidence that there is something else. There's no higher motivation than pleasure. And if there's a procedure for connecting to the ultimate source of pleasure, certainly we become very interested. So that's a very quick and hasty answer to a very deep question, but the question you ask is the question of the lifetime. Congratulations for asking it. It is possible to get to the bottom of it, but how much is it worth to you?
And one more?
Yes, please.
Is there a sense of direction of eliminating self? Because self is inherent in this next level you just talked about.
Yes.
Pleasure implies self.
Yeah, exactly.
So is there something further that says ultimately there's no self, which I cannot comprehend in any sense?
I can appreciate that. There's a common misconception about quote-unquote Eastern philosophy that it's all self-denial. The self is annihilated as the ultimate goal. There's no self. Let me explain what Bhagavad Gita teaches. There's a very famous text or verse in Bhagavad Gita where Krishna explains that never was there a time when we were not individuals. Never will there be such a time. So that is not referring to individuality on material grounds in terms of our body and mind. Krishna is referring to our eternal identity as units of spiritual consciousness. We can't get rid of ourselves as non-material entities, so we might as well start to learn how to live with ourselves. And if we're going to understand our spiritual individuality as eternal, what is it that we're a part of? Who will say, I am the everything, I am moving the sun and the moon? I've met a few people like that, but it is all me and I am it. Dealing with that point, one is aware of the Upanishads. The prime duty of the spiritual text known as the Upanishads is to convince you that you are spiritual, known in Sanskrit as Brahman, and everyone is equally spiritual. Everyone is equally Brahman, but there is a source of Brahman that is greater than the parts. In other words, you are qualitatively equal with the Supreme, just like a particle of gold is qualitatively equal with the contents of a gold mine. But in terms of quantity, well, there's a difference between the particle and the mine. So this is what the Upanishads teach us, and Bhagavad Gita is also known as Gita-upanishad. It's like the culmination of the Upanishads. Once you understand that you are qualitatively equal with the Supreme, but quantitatively you're subordinate because you're so tiny, then you can actually perceive of getting on with your real business in life, which is all about relationships and ultimate connections.
So sorry.
Yes. Anyone else? There's another. Yes.
So it seems to me that there is sort of this conceptual understanding that there's just the Brahman. We're all part of this ocean of consciousness, and even
part of what of consciousness?
The ocean of consciousness, right?
Yeah.
And I think physics is even leading us that way at the quantum level, and the baseball bat is not real. It's 99.99% vacuum, and we're just energy. But that's still at a conceptual level. And then I can try to buy into this notion that we're all spiritual beings that are part of a continuum, and yet it's still a conceptual understanding, that I go by faith and maybe try to conduct my life with that sort of
faith. I don't use that word. Oh.
But to really get
scary.
But to really kind of make it my own reality and sort of transcend that chasm, I need that sort of experiential validation.
Yes.
And that's so elusive.
That's what?
That's so elusive. I mean, that moment of enlightenment, when it becomes your experiential reality that, yes, this is the truth as I know it, and so that you can really conduct your life with that understanding, with conviction. And so, what advice would you have based on the teachings of the Gita in terms of hastening that enlightenment, that moment of enlightenment?
Well, if you're asking me, I would encourage you to enter Krishna's laboratory, apply the methodology, and see the results. You see, nowhere in Bhagavad Gita does Krishna say, believe in me. Nowhere. Everywhere in Bhagavad Gita, Krishna says, you do like this, these are the results you get. You don't do like this, you'll get those results. Isn't that fair enough? Now, there's always, in the beginning, a necessity of a little trust. I mean, when you enrolled in, if you're a student here at Stanford, at whatever level, I mean, you enrolled and you had some trust, right? That the university was going to deliver the goods. So, some initial trust is required for every human endeavor. And if you marry, you have some trust that, well, I think this is going to work out and that you're going to act for my interests and we can harmonize. So every human endeavor requires a little bit of trust. I don't find what Krishna asks for in Bhagavad Gita to be unacceptable or be beyond reason. Now you spoke about physics. This observer and that stuff the observer's observing with. What do you say about that? Where does it come from? What's it made of? This is the most important question. And if we focus all our research and understanding on what exactly is awareness, conscious awareness, I think we would be much more receptive to what Krishna says in Bhagavad Gita. But it's humbling to address that issue. It's very humbling. So much so that if you look in the International Dictionary of Psychology, as of a few years ago, if you look up consciousness, what does it say? Consciousness, no one understands what it is, it probably doesn't exist, and nothing worthwhile has been written about it.
I did look that up.
Huh?
It says the same thing.
I was speaking at IIT in Mumbai, and I presented this And the students were just floored. Like something else I present, since you got me going. I was speaking at Melbourne University, which is the premier university in Australia, and some students were challenging, as will happen, that, well, consciousness can be understood simply in terms of the brain, there's no doubt about it. I said, well, that's a religious statement. I appreciate it, and I respect the religious statement, but you're speaking based on faith. There's no proof of that. They said, well, there may not be proof now, but we're sure it's coming in the future, that the proof that simply neural activity in the brain generates something known as consciousness. I said, well, you're entitled to your faith, but what about this? There are documented incidents of persons who function normally with 97–98% of their gray matter missing. There was a documented case of someone who graduated with an honors degree in mathematics from the University of Sheffield in the UK. And the person went to a doctor, and the doctor noticed, your head is quite large. I just like to do a CAT scan. And the doctor was astonished. 98.5% of your brain matter is missing. There's just liquid there. So I was speaking at Melbourne University, and a professor really, he flipped out. Wait a minute. What are your sources? I said, you'd like to accompany me to my room? I'll show you the scientific journals. It was 10 o'clock at night. He drove a half hour to where I was staying. He was so upset. And I showed him. You recognize these scientific journals? Yes. Here it is. So I said, I asked him, how do you explain that? It seems that consciousness can operate sometimes independent of the brain. He said, oh, I don't want to think about this anymore. I had enough. Yes?
What are your thoughts on the concept of karma yoga and also this
concept of
karma yoga and the shlok also in the Gita which says,
and
there's a shlok in the Gita which talks about work with detachment from results.
Mm-hmm.
So I just was hoping to get some perspective on that.
In India, it is common to say that you should work in such a way that you are not the owner of the results of your actions. But there's another point that's very essential if you're going to understand Krishna's teachings in the Gita. Who does enjoy the results of your action? You may say it's not me, the doer, but someone should, right? So who is it then? See, yoga literally in Sanskrit means connection, link. So who is linked to your actions, to the results of your actions as the enjoyer? You say, it's not me, I detach myself from the fruits of my endeavors. So, but who's enjoying the fruits then? Is it just zero? That's the crucial focus of Bhagavad Gita. Presenting Krishna, the Supreme Consciousness, as the enjoyer of the activities of the particles of consciousness. All right? Thank you. Yes?
So, what is the proof that we are not material?
What kind of proof would you be looking for?
I'm not sure.
Okay, here's a simple way of looking at it. What is it about you that doesn't change even though the body is changing and the mind is changing? Your body and mind have changed, but your family and relatives recognize that basically you're the same core identity. Now, we all know that every cell in the body changes. It used to be held that your brain cells don't change, but that is now old-fashioned, the idea that your brain cells don't change. So all these changes are going on in you on the biological level, but what is it about you that is the core cohesive identity? This is the example Krishna gives in the 2nd chapter of Bhagavad Gita. Your childhood body is gone, your teenage body is gone, your young adult body is gone, but basically there's the same core identity that doesn't change when the body and mind are changing. So that gives you an indication, a very powerful hunch. It's not direct proof in of itself, but it's enough to get your foot in the door, I would say. Now, if you want to verify your non-material identity, we need to take up non-material technology. Just like there's material technology, similarly there's spiritual technology.
For example?
In Bhagavad Gita, Krishna explains all the various ways that you can verify your connection to the Supreme Source of Consciousness. One of the most powerful ways is known as mantra meditation. Mantra, it's a popular word these days. It's used for everything from sales pitches to romantic overtures. Mantra in Sanskrit, literally it means the sound that can rescue your mind from material illusion. If you've ever heard the Hare Krishna mantra, that's exactly what it's meant for. It's prescribed. It's not a sound that's made up. It's prescribed in the yoga texts as the premier method for gaining awareness of your non-material identity. Sound is that powerful. For example, our notion that we are the body and mind comes through sound. You hear that throughout your life. You are the body. Enjoy the body. How's your mind feeling? How's your body feeling? What are you going to achieve in this world? In other words, how are you going to manipulate matter for your satisfaction? What are your ambitions about arranging the material sphere for your pleasure and the pleasure of those bodies that are near and dear to your body? So you hear all this, and it shapes your outlook. It shapes your mentality, and you endeavor in this way. So contamination comes through sound, and purification, illumination, can also come through the right sound. By sound, we are deeply immersed in illusion. We hear, ever since you can remember this life, at least. You hear, you should be doing this. To be happy, you should be doing that. You should be watching this. You should be eating that. Happy people do this. You hear that, and it shapes your life. So the yoga texts recommend special sound, spiritual sound, for reviving your spiritual consciousness. And one can actually consider this as a laboratory experiment. That's how I started. I said, why not be open-minded? Let me see what this is all about. It's not a question of religious belief. As long as we think that we are the body and mind, no matter what our religious beliefs are, we're kind of trapped on a certain level. We need to base our spirituality on a solid chassis of the non-materiality of the self, then we can really go places. But I find that people are very wary of religious beliefs because what's the spiritual technology, and what is the foundation of a spiritual reality? Quite simple. The foundation of the spirituality is that you're not matter. Your identity is spiritual, non-material. But how do you verify all that? So if we can present to the world procedures, laboratory procedures for verifying the non-material nature of the self, then you have a universal platform for a spiritual understanding and progress. And not only that, you have a universal platform for actual peace in the world. Because as you know, the biggest problem now is what to do about the 3 E's. Energy, environment, economics. This world just isn't big enough for all that and all us. But if you can reduce everyone's happiness footprint, then you can actually have a chance for a sustainable world. But as long as you and I think this world is for me and mine, and for fulfilling my material happiness and my material plans, I need this, I need that, because you have this and you have that, there's going to be no peace. So that's why I find now more than ever before we need a different vision of our identity and what will fulfill that identity. Yes?
How do you understand time? What is it?
Time is an energy that affects anything material. If you'll allow me to quote from Bhagavad Gita, there Krishna says in Sanskrit, Kalosmi, I am time, meaning time is an energy of the ultimate source for binding those who have forgotten their timeless identity. You're shackled by past, present, and future. So if you're interested in ultimate pleasure, you understand any pleasure that's bound up by past, present, and future is going to disappoint me. How do I taste pleasure that's not bound by time? That means you've basically got to get out of the material dimension in terms of your pleasure endeavors. During my university days, I have to admit, I was known as a pleasure lover. And I still am, but of a different type. But during my university days, I was known as a pleasure lover of another type. But I began to consider, if my reputation is intact and is actually true, why don't I know anything about pleasure that's without beginning and end? If I'm a pleasure lover, I should be able to contact pleasure that's not subject to temporariness. Otherwise, my reputation is unjustified. So that, considering in that way, led me to Bhagavad Gita and Krishna consciousness, Bhakti Yoga. I approach things simply from the pleasure point of view. Why is all the pleasure that I know about temporary